Most people, when they think about the smartest animals on Earth, think about the big ones. The dolphin, the whale, the elephant, something large enough that the intelligence feels like it fits inside the body. And then somewhere down the list, usually after a few of those, comes the monkey. The animal people associate with mischief, with chaos, with the tree outside the window that they cannot leave alone for 5 seconds. It does not look like the smartest thing in the forest. It looks like it is having too much fun to be taking things seriously. That is the mistake. Tonight we are going to look at what a monkey actually is when you look past the behavior that gets it in trouble, and at what happens when you put that mind up against one of the most celebrated intelligences in the animal world. The elephant is famous for its memory, for its empathy, for its ability to solve problems that stump most other animals. It deserves that reputation, but the comparison between the monkey and the elephant turns out to be a great deal more interesting than most people expect, and it does not go the way the sizes suggest it should. Before we get into it, please subscribe if you have not done so already, and drop a comment right now telling us where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. We read every one of them. The word monkey covers more than 260 species, which is already something worth sitting with for a moment. 260 species spread across 4 continents, ranging in size from the pygmy marmoset, which can fit in the palm of your hand and weighs about 100 grams, to the mandrill, which can weigh 35 kilograms and carries a face that looks like no other animal on Earth. They live in tropical rainforests and dry savannas and mountain highlands and mangrove swamps, and in some cases, the edges of human cities, where they have learned to exploit the food and the shelter that human settlements produce. This range of habitat is itself a signal. An animal that can live successfully in that many different environments is an animal with a flexible, adaptive mind. Specialists are good at one thing. Generalists have to be good at everything. Monkeys are generalists. What that flexibility looks like in practice is one of the more interesting things in the whole of animal behavior research. Japanese macaques living near hot springs in the mountains of northern Japan have been observed bathing in the springs to stay warm during the winter, a behavior that no other non-human primate population had developed before it appeared at one research site and spread to others. The first animal to enter the hot spring was documented. The behavior spread from individual to individual over time, passed not through instinct, but through observation and learning. This is culture. A population of animals developing a new behavior and transmitting it socially without any genetic change involved is doing something that researchers spent decades insisting was a uniquely human capacity. The Japanese macaques did not get the memo. The capuchin monkeys of northeastern Brazil have been doing something with stones for so long that it has left an archaeological record. They select specific rocks of the right size and weight, carry them to specific flat rocks that they use as anvils, and crack open hard-shelled nuts with a precision that takes years to develop. Young capuchins watch adults perform this process for years before they attempt it themselves, and the first attempts are clumsy and often unsuccessful. By the time they are fully adult, the technique is refined enough to be efficient. Researchers excavating the sites where capuchins have been doing this found layers of broken stone tools going back hundreds, possibly thousands of years. A monkey with a stone tool tradition older than most human civilizations is not the animal most people picture when they think of a capuchin. The social intelligence of monkeys is the thing that most directly challenges the assumption that bigger means smarter. A group of baboons navigating their social hierarchy is doing something that requires constant, rapid processing of a complex web of relationships. Every individual knows where it stands relative to every other individual, who is allied with whom, who recently had a conflict with whom, who is likely to side with whom in the event of a dispute. A baboon who reads this landscape incorrectly, who approaches the wrong animal at the wrong time with the wrong level of confidence, pays for the mistake immediately and adjusts its behavior accordingly. The social world of a baboon group is a continuous high-speed intelligence test, and the animals who pass it most consistently are the ones who survive to reproduce more often. Vervet monkeys in East Africa have a vocalization system that contains something that linguists find genuinely interesting. They produce different alarm calls for different types of predator. One call for an eagle, which sends the group running into the undergrowth, A different call for a leopard, which sends them into the trees. A different call for a snake, which causes them to stand upright and look around at the ground. The calls are not interchangeable. The responses they trigger are specific to the threat. Researchers played recordings of the calls to groups that had not seen any predator and consistently observed the appropriate response. The monkeys were responding to information carried in a signal, not to the immediate presence of a threat. This is not communication in the simple sense of an alarm sound. It is referential communication, a system where specific sounds refer to specific things in the world. It is, in functional terms, much closer to a word than a call. The flexibility of monkey problem-solving has been tested in laboratory settings in ways that reveal something that the field observations only suggest. Monkeys exposed to novel problems solve them faster on repeat exposures. They generalize solutions from one context to another. They understand that tools are for specific purposes, not just that a stick can be useful, but that a stick of this diameter and this length is the right tool for this specific task. When the tool they have been given is the wrong size, they do not simply try harder with the wrong tool. They look for a better one. They understand the relationship between tool properties and task requirements in a way that requires genuine causal reasoning, not just trial and error. The Capuchin fairness experiments are worth describing in some detail because they are among the most quoted results in the whole of primate research, and because what they show goes beyond tool use and beyond problem solving into something closer to the core of what we mean when we talk about a mind. Capuchins were trained to exchange tokens for food rewards. When two Capuchins performing the same task received equal rewards, the system worked smoothly. When researchers gave one Capuchin a grape and the other a piece of cucumber, something happened that no one had quite seen before in this context. The Capuchin receiving the cucumber stopped cooperating. In some cases, it threw the cucumber at the researcher. In some cases, it refused to return the token at all. The animal was not just unhappy with its reward. It was comparing its reward to what the other animal was receiving and objecting to the inequality. The sense of fairness that underpins this response is one that most people associate with conscious moral awareness. Whether or not that description is scientifically precise, what was happening in that experiment was something a simple animal cannot do. It requires knowing what you have, knowing what someone else has, knowing those things are not the same and caring about the difference. The brains of monkeys are smaller than the brains of elephants in absolute terms. This is true, and it is not the whole story. Brain size relative to body size is a better predictor of cognitive flexibility than absolute brain size, and on that measure, the monkey is in a completely different position than the absolute numbers suggest. The ratio of brain to body in capuchins is the highest of any non-human primate, including chimpanzees. What that ratio reflects is a brain that, relative to the demands placed on it by the body it inhabits, is doing an extraordinary amount of processing. Small body, large brain, complex social world, flexible behavior. The capuchin is not impressive in the way that the elephant is impressive, with its scale and its presence and its obvious cognitive depth. It is impressive in a quieter, more concentrated way, the way that a complicated machine in a small package is impressive when you understand what it is doing. There is a specific kind of cognitive test called delayed non-match to sample that has been used extensively in comparative cognition research because it measures something fundamental about working memory, the ability to hold information in mind over a delay and use it to guide behavior. An animal is shown an object, then after a delay is shown two objects and must choose the one it did not see before. The length of the delay can be adjusted to stress different memory systems. Monkeys perform on this task at levels that have consistently exceeded the performance of other non-primate mammals, and in some versions of the task they have performed at levels that humans find challenging when equivalent delays are applied. This is not a measure of general intelligence. It is a measure of a specific capacity that turns out to matter for a huge range of real-world cognitive tasks, from social reasoning to foraging to tool use. What makes monkeys particularly interesting in this comparison is how quickly they adapt. A monkey placed in a new environment begins solving its problems within hours. A monkey that encounters a new type of food figures out how to process it through observation and trial, often within a single day. A monkey that loses its usual foraging ground shifts its strategy rather than persisting with what is no longer working. This is the adaptive flexibility that the diversity of monkey species reflects at the population level, and it is also what happens at the level of the individual animal inside a single lifetime. Elephants are impressive at many things. At speed of adaptation to novel problems, the monkey has a genuine advantage, and that advantage comes from the specific architecture of a brain built for a fast-changing, socially complex, unpredictable world. The comparison with the elephant is going to require a serious look at what elephants actually do, because dismissing them to make the monkey look good is not what this story is about. The elephant is a genuine cognitive phenomenon, with capabilities that are documented and real and that dwarf those of most animals on Earth. But the comparison, when it is made honestly, produces a result that is not what the sizes suggest. The monkey's mind, built small and built fast, and built for an enormously complex social world, does things that the elephant's mind, built large and built slow and built for a different kind of life, cannot match. What those things are and why they matter is where we go next. What monkeys do with social information that most animals cannot do is remember it across time and use it strategically. A female baboon who was groomed by another female last week is more likely to receive help from that female in a conflict this week. The exchange is not immediate. It is tracked and balanced across days and sometimes weeks. Researchers have measured this by watching who grooms whom and then watching who supports whom in disputes, and the relationship between the two is consistent enough to have statistical significance. These animals are running a social ledger. They remember what they are owed and what they owe, and they act on that information in ways that serve their long-term interests. This is the kind of cognition that most tests of animal intelligence are not designed to measure, because it is slow and diffuse and plays out over long periods in the field. But it is cognitively demanding in a real way, and monkeys do it well. The rhesus macaque is probably the most studied non-human primate in the world, partly because it adapts well to laboratory conditions, and partly because its cognitive profile is rich enough to produce interesting results across a huge range of experimental paradigms. What the decades of research on rhesus macaques have shown is an animal that understands numerical quantities, that tracks statistical probabilities across repeated experiences, that recognizes individual faces both within and across species, and that responds to social cues with a speed and an accuracy that requires rapid parallel processing of multiple sources of information simultaneously. When a rhesus macaque looks at a face, it is not just identifying who the face belongs to. It is reading expression, assessing emotional state, updating its model of what that individual is likely to do, and preparing its own response, all before the interaction has begun. This is rapid social cognition, operating at a level that most animals cannot access. The fact that monkeys live in trees for much of their lives has shaped their cognition in ways that go beyond social reasoning. Navigating a three-dimensional environment, tracking the location of food sources that appear and disappear seasonally, managing the physical problem of moving through canopy vegetation where one wrong judgment means a fall. All of this has pushed the monkey brain toward a kind of rapid, flexible spatial reasoning that is different from the spatial reasoning of ground-dwelling animals. A monkey moving through canopy at speed is making continuous predictions about where to put its weight, which branch will hold, which gap is crossable. This is not reflexive, it is a kind of active real-time physics calculation that requires a fast, accurate model of the physical world. The same brain architecture that supports this supports the problem-solving flexibility that shows up in the experiments. One of the things researchers have found most striking about monkey cognition is how quickly monkeys learn from watching others. This social learning goes beyond the simple copying that many animals are capable of. Monkeys observe, extract the principle behind what they are seeing rather than just the specific action, and apply that principle in new situations. A monkey that watches another monkey solve a puzzle by pulling a handle does not just try pulling handles on every subsequent puzzle. It infers that the relevant feature was the pulling action on a specific type of mechanism, and it applies that inference selectively. This capacity for what researchers call emulation, Learning the goal and the general method, rather than copying the exact sequence of movements, is one of the markers of higher-level social learning and is far more cognitively demanding than simple imitation. The diversity within the monkey category also gives it something the elephant lacks, which is specialization at scale. Different monkey species have pushed different cognitive capacities to different extremes. The spider monkey has a spatial memory for food locations that is among the best documented in any non-human primate, tracking hundreds of fruiting trees across a range of several square kilometers and returning to each as it becomes productive in its season. The gelada has a social complexity that rivals any primate, managing a layered society in which reproductive units nest inside bands, nest inside communities, each level requiring different social strategies. The capuchin has a problem-solving flexibility that has been tested more thoroughly than almost any other monkey and consistently produces results that push the boundaries of what researchers expected. 260 species is not redundancy. It is 260 different experiments in what a monkey mind can become. The monkey's relationship with danger is also a window into its cognition. Prey animals that rely on instinct alone do not last long in environments with multiple, variable predator types. The vervet's alarm call system is the most documented example, but it is not the only one. Capuchins have been observed using a lookout system in which one individual positions itself at an elevated point, while the group forages below and changes its behavior, including vocalizing specific signals when it detects a threat. Researchers watching this noted that the lookout role was not randomly assigned. Individuals with better vantage points and better track records of reliable alerting were more often in the lookout position. The group was making a social judgment about who was best at the job and allocating the role accordingly. This requires both individual assessment of competence and collective adjustment to that assessment, which is a level of social organization that most people do not associate with animals of this size. The urban macaques of cities like Delhi and Kuala Lumpur have added a dimension to the monkey intelligence story that field researchers in forests did not fully anticipate. These animals have learned to navigate human environments with a sophistication that is genuinely striking. They understand traffic patterns well enough to cross roads at safer moments. They have learned which humans carry food and which do not, which behaviors from humans signal threat, and which signal a softer response, and they have in some cases learned to steal objects from tourists that they then exchange for food. This is not the kind of intelligence that a natural environment selects for. It is a transfer of problem-solving capacity developed in one context to a completely different one, applied with the speed and the accuracy that comes from a genuinely flexible mind, rather than one that is only good at the specific tasks its evolution prepared it for. The elephant in a city is a disaster. The monkey in a city is at home within a generation. There is a quality to monkey intelligence that is harder to measure than memory capacity or tool use or social tracking, which is the quality of what you might call attentiveness. A monkey in its environment is actively processing what is around it in a way that produces, in the observer, a sense of presence and engagement that is different from the awareness of animals operating more on instinct. Watch a capuchin examine a novel object. It will look at it from multiple angles, test it with its hands, put it in its mouth, and take it out, tap it against another surface, and then do something that researchers describe as watching and waiting to see if anything happens. It is running an experiment, not in the formal sense, but in the functional sense of deliberately varying its interactions with something to gather information about what that thing is and what it does. That quality of active, curious, exploratory engagement with the world is not universal in the animal kingdom. It is one of the things that makes a monkey a monkey. The elephant deserves its reputation. We will get to what the elephant does that is genuinely astonishing, and we will be fair about it because the elephant has a case that deserves to be heard fully before the comparison is made. But the monkey has a case too, and it is a stronger one than the size difference suggests, and the size difference is exactly what makes it interesting. The animals that had to be clever because they could not be big are often the ones that ended up being the most interesting to scientists, trying to understand what intelligence actually is, how it develops, what it is for, and where the boundaries of it are. The monkey sits right at that question, and in the next part we are going to look at the specific dimensions where that question becomes sharpest and where the monkey's answer to it is the most unexpected. The reproductive success of monkeys is tied to their intelligence in a way that is direct and measurable. In species where researchers have been able to track individual outcomes over years, the animals with the highest social rank, the ones who read the social landscape most accurately and manage their alliances most effectively, tend to live longer and reproduce more. This is not a surprise once you accept that the social world of a monkey is the primary environment that their intelligence evolved to navigate. But it has an implication that is worth making explicit. The intelligence is not an add-on to the monkey's life. It is the core survival tool. The monkey that is bad at social reasoning does not just lose friends. It loses food, loses protection, loses access to mates, and eventually loses the game entirely. Natural selection in a social primate is not primarily about who can run fastest or fight hardest, though those things matter too. It is about who can navigate a world made of other minds. The monkey has been solving that problem for tens of millions of years, and the mind that has emerged from that process is one that we are still figuring out how to measure properly. The question of whether monkeys are smarter than elephants is not one that has a clean answer, if you're asking it the way most people ask it, meaning which one is better across the board. Intelligence is not a single quantity. It is a collection of capacities, and different animals have those capacities in different proportions depending on what the selective pressures of their evolutionary history demanded. The elephant is not stupid. The monkey is not trying to be the elephant. What makes the comparison interesting is that the two animals represent very different solutions to the problem of how to have a smart brain, and the monkey's solution, cramming a large amount of processing capacity into a small package and pointing it at the fastest changing, most socially complex problem available, turns out to produce results that are surprising when you look at them next to an animal 5 or 10 times larger. The surprise is the point, and it is a surprise that becomes sharper in the next part when we look at where the monkey's specific strengths are most clearly visible and at what they mean for the comparison we are building toward. The howler monkey adds a different dimension to the picture of monkey intelligence. It is not known for tool use or for complex problem solving in controlled settings. What it is known for is the loudest call of any land animal in the world relative to its body size, a sound produced by a specialized hyoid bone in the throat that amplifies the howl to a volume audible from several kilometers away. The call is used to communicate territory, to coordinate movement, and to maintain contact between groups in dense forest where visibility is limited. What makes this relevant to the intelligence conversation is not the volume, but what the call requires from the brain producing it. The howler monkey manages a complex acoustic communication system that carries specific information about the caller's identity, its location, and its social state. And it does this in a way that other members of the species decode and respond to appropriately. The sophistication of that communication system reflects a brain that is doing something more than simple signaling. It is producing and interpreting a structured information system. That is a cognitive task, and it is one the howler monkey runs continuously throughout its day. The vervet monkey gave researchers one of the most important early demonstrations of animal semantic communication. Vervets in the wild produce different alarm calls for different types of predators. One call for an eagle, which sends other vervets running into the undergrowth, a different call for a snake, which causes them to stand up and look around on the ground, a third for a leopard, which sends them up into the trees. These are not generalized alarm signals. They are specific signals that carry information about the category of threat. The vervets hearing the call respond to the information in it, not just to the alarm. When researchers played recorded vervet calls through a hidden speaker with no actual predator present, the other vervets responded appropriately to whichever call was played. They were responding to the meaning of the sound, not just the sound. This was a significant finding when it was first published, because it showed that non-human animals could produce and understand signals that functioned like words, carrying specific referential meaning that influenced the behavior of others. Vervets were not the last animal shown to do this, but they were among the first, and the research started a line of investigation into animal communication that is still producing new findings today. The baboon is one of the most studied monkeys in the wild, partly because it lives in open savanna habitats that are easier to observe than dense forest, and partly because its social complexity makes it a productive subject for research into the relationship between social living and cognitive development. Baboon troops can include over 100 individuals, and the social network within a troop is intricate enough that researchers tracking it have found it to be a better predictor of individual health outcomes than almost any other variable they measured. Baboons with stronger social bonds live longer, recover faster from injuries and illnesses, and have offspring that survive at higher rates. The social network is not just a feature of baboon life, it is a life support system, and navigating it effectively, maintaining the right bonds, managing conflicts without escalating them beyond what is recoverable, and tracking the relationships of dozens of other individuals simultaneously is the cognitive task that the baboon brain is most specifically organized around. When you understand this, the baboon's brain size relative to its body, which is among the highest of any non-human primate, stops being a surprise. It is the cost of running that social software at the scale the troop requires. The colobus monkey presents a quieter version of primate intelligence that sometimes gets overlooked precisely because it is quiet. Colobus monkeys are leaf specialists, living almost entirely on foliage that most other primates cannot digest efficiently. They have a multi-chambered stomach, adapted for fermenting cellulose, which is unusual for a primate. Their social life is less dramatic than the baboons, and their tool use is essentially non-existent. But the colobus makes choices about which leaves to eat that reflect real nutritional knowledge. They select leaves based on their protein-to-fiber ratio, avoiding the most toxic ones and prioritizing the most nutritious ones. And they change these selections seasonally, as the chemical composition of available leaves shifts. This is not random. It is a sophisticated, continuously updated model of the nutritional landscape around them, maintained and applied to daily foraging decisions. It is not the kind of intelligence that gets celebrated in laboratory studies. It is the kind that keeps an animal alive in a specific environment by doing exactly what that environment requires, which is also what intelligence is for. The macaque's success as a genus tells its own story about cognitive flexibility. There are around 23 species of macaque, living in environments that range from the tropical forests of Southeast Asia to the mountains of Japan, to the semi-arid scrublands of North Africa, to the cities of India. No other non-human primate genus spans such a diversity of habitats. The cognitive flexibility required to thrive in a Japanese snowfield, a Balinese temple complex, and a Moroccan forest is not the same flexibility that allows any single individual to do all of these things. It is a population-level trait, the capacity for the species to produce individuals whose behavioral repertoire is open enough to incorporate whatever a specific environment demands. The macaque succeeds in so many different places because its brain is not narrowly tuned to one kind of problem. It is a general-purpose cognitive system capable of being customized through learning and through culture to whatever the local situation requires. That generality is itself a form of intelligence, and it is one that the monkey displays more consistently than almost any other animal of comparable size. What the monkey brings to the comparison with the elephant, taken all together, is not simply a different kind of intelligence, but a demonstration that intelligence is not proportional to size. The monkey's brain, small in absolute terms, large in relative terms, and organized around the specific demands of a complex social life in a variable environment, produces outcomes that are sophisticated, flexible, culturally transmitted, and in some specific domains, genuinely surprising when placed next to animals many times larger. The elephant is next. Its case is strong. But the monkey's case has been made, and it is not the weaker one. The monkey that built its nest tonight in whatever tree was available, that spent the day navigating a social landscape of dozens of competing interests, that taught its offspring by example and learned from its companions by watching, is not a simpler version of something smarter. It is a fully realized version of itself, shaped by tens of millions of years into exactly what it is. What it is in the one dimension that this series is built around is faster than the elephant. Faster to learn, faster to update, faster to transfer, faster to adapt. In a world that keeps moving, that is not nothing. That is, in fact, a great deal. The monkey learns faster. That is the short version of what this part is about, and it is worth saying it plainly before going into the detail. The elephant has remarkable memory. The elephant has documented empathy, tool use, and a social life of genuine depth. None of that is in dispute, and all of it will get its proper treatment in the next two parts. But when researchers have set up controlled comparisons designed to test how quickly each species acquires a new rule, how flexibly they apply learned knowledge to situations they have not encountered before, and how well they transfer a skill learned in one context to a different context, the monkey has consistently shown a speed and a flexibility that the elephant does not match. This is not about which animal is smarter in some global sense. It is about which animal is built to update faster. And on that specific dimension, the monkey wins. Subscribe before we go any further. Drop a comment right now telling us where in the world you are and what time it is there. We love seeing where these videos reach. Before getting into the specific test results, it is worth asking what we mean by faster in this context. Speed of learning is not just about how quickly an animal solves a single problem. A single problem can be solved by trial and error, by luck, by a narrowly tuned instinct that happens to apply. What matters in the cognitive comparison is how quickly an animal transfers what it learned from one problem to a new one that shares the same underlying structure. That transfer speed is what separates genuine rule learning from rote memorization, and it is what the learning set studies measure. The monkey's transfer speed is high. It generalizes from experience rapidly and applies that generalization broadly. This is what fast intelligence looks like in practice, not just solving the problem in front of you, but extracting from it something that helps with the next problem, and the one after that. The size of the problem space the monkey can navigate is also relevant. A small animal living in a large social group in a variable environment faces a problem space that changes constantly, because the other group members are all making decisions that affect what the landscape of options looks like for everyone else. An animal that cannot update quickly in this kind of problem space does not just fall behind socially. It loses resources, loses allies, and eventually loses the reproductive access that keeps its genes in the next generation. The monkey's speed is not a luxury. It is the minimum viable cognitive speed for the social life the monkey lives. The elephant's social life is simpler in this respect. Not less rich emotionally, but less rapidly changing in its political texture, which is why a slower, deeper cognitive style works well enough for the elephant, even though it would not work for the monkey. The concept researchers use to capture this difference is called learning set formation, sometimes called learning to learn. The basic test works like this. You present an animal with a problem it has never seen before and let it figure out the solution. Then you present a new problem of the same type, and a new one and another, across many trials. What you measure is how quickly the animal figures out each successive problem compared to the first one. An animal that has genuinely learned the underlying rule, not just the specific correct answer to the first problem, gets faster and faster as the trials continue. It has abstracted something from the experience of solving the first problem that it can apply to the next one. An animal that is only learning the specific answer to each specific problem does not improve across trials. Each new problem looks like a new one. Monkeys, particularly macaques, show strong learning set formation. After enough exposure to the format, a macaque faced with a new problem of the same type solves it in 1 or 2 tries. It has learned how to learn this kind of problem. Elephants show learning set formation too, but more slowly and less completely. This matters because learning set formation is one of the closest things to a direct test of abstract reasoning that comparative psychologists have been able to design, and on this test, the monkey consistently performs above the elephant. The monkey's advantage is sharpest in tasks that require rapid updating of a learned behavior in response to changing conditions. Researchers call this reversal learning. You train an animal to choose option A over option B for a reward. Once it has the rule reliably, You switch things so that B now gives the reward and A does not. The question is how quickly the animal abandons the old rule and adopts the new one. Monkeys update faster in reversal learning tasks than elephants, significantly faster. The monkey is not attached to the specific answer. It is attached to the process of finding the current answer, and it switches quickly when the situation demands it. This flexibility is exactly what a small animal, navigating a complex, unpredictable social environment needs. The speed advantage extends to social learning. Monkeys watching another individual solve a problem acquire the solution significantly faster than those who have to figure it out alone, and they acquire it faster than elephants in equivalent social learning paradigms. Part of this is attentional. Monkeys are intensely attentive to other group members because in a complex social group, what other individuals are doing is almost always information worth having. That attention translates directly into faster uptake of demonstrated solutions. A useful new behavior, once discovered by any member of a monkey group, can spread through the group far more quickly than through an elephant herd. The monkey community as a whole updates faster, not just because individual monkeys learn faster, but because the social transmission mechanism runs at a higher speed. The difference in how monkeys and elephants perform on tasks that require holding multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously becomes clear in a specific class of experiments called delayed response tasks. You show an animal a reward being hidden in one of several locations, then you impose a delay before letting the animal respond. The length of delay the animal can tolerate before its accuracy degrades tells you something specific about how its working memory operates under time pressure. Monkeys tolerate shorter delays than elephants before accuracy drops, which means their working memory is smaller in the sense of temporal duration. But within their window, they are faster to encode, faster to retrieve, and faster to act on the information they hold. The elephant holds information longer. The monkey uses it faster. These are different tools, and which tool is more useful depends on what kind of problem you are solving. In a stable landscape, where the location of a water source matters more than the speed of finding food, the elephant's tool is better. In a dynamic social environment, where what matters is who just did what to whom and what the best response is right now, the monkey's tool is better. The urban monkey is one of the most striking demonstrations of cognitive flexibility in practice. Rhesus macaques in Indian cities, long-tailed macaques at temple complexes across Southeast Asia, vervet monkeys in African towns, these populations are navigating human infrastructure, human social behavior, and human food systems with a speed and accuracy that reflects genuine learning rather than instinct. A macaque that has learned which tourists carry food, or how to open a container it has never seen before, is applying cognitive flexibility to a genuinely novel environment that the genome has not had time to adapt to. The animal is doing this with its brain in real time, using the general-purpose learning machinery that evolution built for a different environment, but that works well in this one too. The elephant does not do this. Elephants that encounter human settlements generally come into conflict with them, raiding crops and being displaced. The elephant is not cognitively equipped to integrate into a human environment at the pace the current world demands. The monkey is. This difference has real consequences for which species survives in the landscapes that humans are creating. Monkey populations in human-altered environments often do well. Elephant populations in equivalent landscapes decline, fragment, and require intensive conservation management to persist. Some of this is about body size and the space and food each animal requires, but some of it is about cognitive flexibility, about which animal can update its behavior fast enough to find a way to live in a world that is changing faster than evolution can follow. The Capuchins' multi-century tradition of stone tool use in Brazil, traced through archaeological excavation of their nut-cracking sites, is what cognitive flexibility produces when it compounds over time. That is not just tool use in isolation, that is cumulative culture, a behavioral tradition, built up and transmitted across generations by nothing more than the social learning mechanism that passes knowledge from one animal to the next. The tradition builds on itself. What one generation figured out becomes the starting point for the next. Cumulative culture of this kind was once considered uniquely human. The capuchins have been demonstrating otherwise for longer than any of the researchers who study them have been alive. Number sense is another area where monkeys have consistently surprised researchers. Rhesus macaques and squirrel monkeys distinguish between sets with different numbers of objects and make choices based on which set contains more. They do this through fast perceptual estimation rather than any form of counting. Elephants have number sense too, and their performance on quantity discrimination tasks is solid. But when speed is the tested variable, when the task requires a rapid response rather than a considered one, monkeys are consistently faster. The quick assessment of more versus less, applied rapidly under time pressure, is another place where the monkey's design gives it an edge. Working memory. The ability to hold multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously and combine them to reach a decision in the moment is where the monkey's processing advantage is most direct. In tasks designed to test working memory under time pressure, monkeys perform at levels that rival or exceed what has been measured in elephants under equivalent conditions. The elephant's deep advantage is in long-term retention, in the accurate recollection of specific events and locations across years and decades. The monkey's advantage is in fast, flexible manipulation of information right now. These are different cognitive tools built for different problems. In a world that keeps presenting new problems at speed, the monkey's tool is often the more useful one. One of the clearest demonstrations of the monkey's cognitive flexibility under real-world conditions comes from the studies of problem-solving in wild capuchin populations where researchers introduced novel food sources that required new techniques to access. The capuchins that encountered these sources for the first time went through a period of experimentation, testing different approaches with a persistence and a variety of methods that reflected active problem-solving rather than repeated application of a fixed instinct. When one individual found an effective technique, others nearby observed and incorporated it into their own behavior within hours to days. The speed of adoption was consistent with active imitation rather than simple contagion. These were animals watching each other, extracting the relevant technique and applying it to their own attempts in a way that reflected genuine social learning. The elephant has been documented engaging in social learning too, but the speed at which monkey groups adopt and spread new solutions is consistently higher in the studies that have compared them directly. The alarm call research on Campbell's monkeys in West Africa found that they combined call elements in sequences that changed meaning depending on context, producing what some researchers described as a rudimentary form of syntax. The comparison with elephant communication is instructive here. Elephants have a rich acoustic communication system using infrasound calls that carry significant social information over long distances. But the monkey's call system in some species shows structural properties that point toward combinatorial meaning in a way that elephant calls do not. Whether this represents a genuine precursor to human language or something that resembles it only superficially is still debated, but the evidence is there, and it belongs in any serious account of what monkey minds produce. There is one more thing about the monkey that sits at the center of everything else in this comparison. The monkey's social world is not a background condition for its intelligence. It is the primary driver of it. The demands of living in a group of dozens of individuals, each with their own relationships, histories, and shifting positions relative to everyone else, drove the development of a brain that is fast, accurate, and perpetually updated. The same brain that tracks social hierarchies and alliance dynamics is the brain that learns new rules quickly and transfers that learning across contexts. The social intelligence and the general cognitive flexibility are not separate systems. They are the same system, built for one purpose and flexible enough to apply to many others. That is the monkey, and that is the case the next two parts have to answer. The way monkey intelligence has been studied has itself changed significantly over the decades, and those changes have produced a progressively more impressive picture of what monkey minds can do. Early comparative psychology relied heavily on tasks designed for human cognitive testing, scaled down for animal subjects, and monkeys did not always perform well on these tasks, not because they lacked the cognitive capacity, but because the tasks did not match what their brains were optimized for. As researchers developed tests that were more ecologically valid, more matched to the kinds of problems monkeys actually solve in their natural lives, the performance improved dramatically. The monkey that struggled on a formal category learning task, borrowed from human cognitive science, performed at a much higher level on a social inference task that required predicting the behavior of a dominant individual based on prior interaction history. The monkey's intelligence was there all along. The early tests were looking in the wrong place. This point matters for the comparison with the elephant because it applies in both directions. Some of the tasks on which elephants have performed impressively are tasks that match the kinds of problems elephants actually face in the wild: navigation, long-term memory for specific locations and individuals, social recognition across long separations. On those tasks, elephants can appear to outperform monkeys. But when the comparison is done on tasks that are matched to the monkey's natural cognitive demands, the monkey comes back strongly. The fairest version of the comparison is not any single task. It is the full picture across many tasks, many species, and many experimental paradigms. And that full picture is what makes the monkey's case as strong as it is. The macaque's performance in mirror self-recognition tests is worth noting here because it adds a layer to the flexibility argument. Some macaque species, including rhesus macaques, have shown partial mirror self-recognition in certain experimental conditions, though the evidence is less clean than for great apes. What this suggests is not that macaques have the full self-awareness of a chimpanzee, but that the capacity for self-referential cognition exists on a continuum in primates, and that monkeys are not at the bottom of that continuum the way a simple, reflex-driven animal would be. The self-model that a monkey carries, even if it is less complete than what a chimpanzee or a human carries, is part of what allows it to model the minds of others, to predict their behavior, and to adjust its own behavior based on those predictions. That capacity, the ability to model other minds, is one of the foundations of the social intelligence that gives the monkey its cognitive edge. The Capuchin's response to inequity is one of the most famous experiments in comparative psychology. Two capuchins are placed in adjacent chambers where they can see each other. Each performs the same task, handing a researcher a token in exchange for a food reward. When both receive the same reward, both continue performing. When one receives a grape and the other receives a less desirable piece of cucumber for the same task, the one receiving the cucumber often refuses to continue, sometimes throwing the cucumber back at the researcher. The animal is not just reacting to the food, it is comparing its outcome to its neighbors and reacting to the difference. That comparison requires holding two things in mind simultaneously and recognizing a relationship between them that the animal's own experience does not fully explain. It requires, in short, a sense of fairness, or something that functions like one. Whether we want to call it that is a philosophical question. What the behavior itself shows is a cognitive operation that is more sophisticated than simple reward-seeking, and that is worth noting in any comparison between this animal and an elephant. The monkey has also contributed more to our understanding of human cognition than almost any other animal, not because it is the most intelligent, but because it is intelligent enough to be informative and similar enough to us to allow meaningful comparisons. The neural mechanisms behind learning, memory, attention, and decision-making that have been studied in macaques have produced findings that apply directly to our understanding of how human brains solve the same problems. This is not an accident. The macaque's brain and the human brain share a common evolutionary ancestry and a significant structural overlap. What this means for the comparison is that when we test monkey cognition, we are not testing something alien. We are testing a version of the same cognitive architecture that produced human intelligence, running on less hardware, pointed at a narrower range of problems, but using fundamentally similar mechanisms. The monkey is not trying to be human. It is doing something adjacent to what humans do with a brain, that is orders of magnitude smaller, and the performance level it achieves on the kinds of tasks it is tested on is itself one of the most informative findings in the whole history of cognitive science. The Capuchin's response to inequity is one of the most famous experiments in comparative psychology. Two capuchins are placed in adjacent chambers where they can see each other. Each performs the same task, handing a researcher a token in exchange for a food reward. When both receive the same reward, both continue. When one receives a grape and the other receives a piece of cucumber for the same task. The one with the cucumber often refuses to continue, sometimes throwing the cucumber back. The animal is comparing its outcome to its neighbors and reacting to the difference. That comparison requires holding two things in mind simultaneously and recognizing a relationship between them that the animal's own experience does not fully explain. It is a fast, socially calibrated cognitive operation that is exactly the kind of thing the monkey's brain evolved to do. The spider monkey's visuospatial processing represents yet another dimension of monkey cognitive speed. Moving through the forest canopy at the pace spider monkeys move requires continuous real-time calculation of weight, momentum, branch flexibility, and the positions of dozens of potential handholds in rapid sequence. A spider monkey that misjudges a branch falls 30 meters. The accuracy required, repeated hundreds of times a day across an entire life, reflects a processing system running at a level of performance that no terrestrial animal approaches. This is not the same kind of intelligence as solving a reversal learning task, but it is intelligence in the full rigorous sense, a brain solving a hard problem in real time with genuine stakes attached to every error. The monkey does it fluidly, which is to say it does it with a brain so well calibrated for this specific task that the task has become automatic. That calibration is a cognitive achievement in its own right. What the cognitive research on monkeys has also revealed, and what is directly relevant to the comparison with the elephant, is that the monkey's intelligence is not uniformly distributed across all tasks. There are things the monkey is exceptionally good at: fast learning, social inference, rule transfer, adapting to novelty, and things it is less good at: sustained attention over long periods on a single low-complexity task, precise spatial memory over very large distances, the kind of deep pattern recognition across many years that the elephant's long-term memory enables. The monkey excels at breadth and speed. The elephant excels at depth and duration. In the academic literature on comparative cognition, this is sometimes framed as a distinction between the cognitive style of a species that evolved in a complex social environment versus one that evolved in a stable spatial environment. Both styles are genuine intelligence. In the specific contest the title of this series describes, one of them wins on most of the standard measures. That one is the monkey. The question of whether any of this makes monkeys smarter than elephants still does not have a clean yes or no answer, but it has something better than that. It has a specific and honest answer about which kind of mind does which kind of work more effectively. The monkey's mind is a fast, socially calibrated, flexibly updating system that turns out to be very good at a wide range of cognitive tasks that were not what it originally evolved for. The elephant's mind is a deep, emotionally rich, long-range memory system that is optimized for a specific set of problems that require patience and precision rather than speed. In the next two parts, the elephant makes its full case. It is a strong one, but it is a different case from the monkeys, and that difference is the heart of the comparison. The way monkey troops respond to a new threat in their environment is one of the most direct demonstrations of group-level cognitive updating. When a novel predator or a new human technology enters the range of a monkey troop for the first time, the troop's response changes over days and weeks in ways that reflect learning at the group level. Individuals who encounter the threat first learn to avoid it. They communicate that avoidance through alarm calls and through behavioral contagion, the tendency of other group members to copy the behavior of conspecifics who are showing fear or caution. Within a short period, the entire troop behaves differently around the new threat, even though most members have not encountered it directly. This is rapid collective learning, and it is one of the cognitive mechanisms that has allowed monkey species to persist in environments that are changing faster than any individual animal's lifespan would allow it to learn from personal experience alone. The troop learns as a unit. The individual monkey benefits from the learning of its whole group. That is a cognitive multiplier that the elephant's smaller, slower updating social system does not produce to the same degree. The last thing worth saying about the monkey's cognitive advantage before the elephant makes its case is something that the behavioral data consistently points toward, but that does not always get stated plainly. The monkey is paying attention. Not just to food and predators and mates, though it is paying attention to those things too. It is paying attention to everything, continuously, with the specific quality of attention that a complex social environment produces in a brain shape to navigate it. That continuous multi-channel attention is not just a byproduct of social living, it is the foundation of the monkey's cognitive flexibility. You cannot update fast if you are not tracking what is changing. You cannot transfer learning to new contexts if you are not noticing what the new contexts contain. The monkey notices. It notices faster and more broadly than the elephant does, and that noticing is the engine behind everything else in this comparison that goes in the monkey's favor. The monkey in the city and the monkey in the forest are running the same software. It is software that was written for the forest, that has the social tracking and the fast updating and the alliance management baked into every layer of it. And that turns out to be general enough to apply to streets and buildings and tourists with food, just as well as it applies to trees and fruit and group members with competing interests. That generality is not a coincidence. It is what happens when you build a cognitive system around the problem of navigating other minds in a changing environment, and then you point it at a changing environment. The monkey's intelligence was always ready for this world. It was just waiting for the world to show up. One more dimension of the monkey's cognitive advantage deserves attention before we hand the floor to the elephant. The speed at which monkey infants develop their cognitive capabilities compared to elephant calves. A baby macaque is navigating the social landscape of its troop within weeks of birth, making decisions about who to approach and who to avoid, tracking relationships, and beginning the process of learning the social rules that will govern its life. An elephant calf, born with a much larger brain, takes years to reach equivalent functional social competence. The monkey's faster developmental trajectory is not just a matter of reaching adulthood sooner. It is a reflection of a cognitive system that is designed to come online quickly and start running at high speed. The monkey's intelligence is fast from the beginning. It is fast by design. The elephant's intelligence is deep by design, and depth takes time to develop. In the specific comparison this series is about, fast is what we measured in the first two parts and found clearly in the monkey's favor. In the next two parts, deep is what we measure, and it is the elephant's answer to everything the monkey just showed us. The monkey's case has been made. The monkey learns faster, updates more reliably, adapts to new environments at a speed the elephant cannot match, produces culture through social transmission, and runs cognitive operations at a clock speed that reflects tens of millions of years of evolution under social pressure. The elephant is still to come, and the elephant, as we will see, has its own answer to all of it. The social memory of monkeys is worth one more look before we close this part, because it is the place where the monkey's cognitive speed shows up most consistently and most impressively across the widest range of species. In a troop of 50 baboons, every individual maintains a running model of every other individual's relationships. Not just their own relationship with each animal, but the relationships those animals have with each other. Who is allied with whom? Who is in conflict? Who just groomed whom this morning, and what that might mean for this afternoon. This is a social map of extraordinary complexity, and it is updated continuously in real time as new interactions occur and old ones change. Researchers who have tried to model the cognitive demands of this map-keeping have calculated that it requires a working memory capacity that scales with group size in a way that directly predicts the relative brain sizes of primate species across the order. The monkey with the biggest group has the biggest brain for its body size. The brain is a social organ. It is the size it is because the social world it navigates requires it to be. And the social world of a monkey, in terms of its complexity and its rate of change, is a world that the elephant simply does not inhabit. The elephant's world is slower, deeper, and more spatially organized. The monkey's world is faster, more intricate, and more socially dense. Both worlds produce intelligence. The monkey's world produces it faster. The number of monkey species that have been studied in enough depth to contribute meaningfully to the cognitive picture, drawn in these two parts, is itself worth noting because it speaks to the breadth of the monkey's cognitive success as a strategy. Capuchins, macaques, baboons, vervets, spider monkeys, howler monkeys, colobus monkeys, marmosets, squirrel monkeys, each of these has contributed specific findings to the research record, and across all of them, a consistent picture emerges. The specific capabilities differ by species. The underlying orientation towards speed, flexibility, and social calibration is consistent. The monkey genus after genus, family after family, in forest after forest across 3 continents, keeps arriving at the same broad cognitive strategy through independent evolutionary paths. That convergence is itself evidence. It is saying something about what the demands of a certain kind of life produce in a brain that has to meet those demands. It is saying that speed and social intelligence are what you get when you are small and social and need to stay alive in a world of other minds. And it is saying it loudly enough across enough species that the message is hard to argue with. The monkey learns faster. The evidence for this is deep and broad. The elephant remembers everything. That is the reputation, and for once the reputation is not an exaggeration. The elephant's long-term memory for specific individuals, specific places, and specific events is one of the most thoroughly documented cognitive abilities in the animal kingdom. Elephants in the wild have been observed recognizing the calls of individuals they have not heard in over 12 years. They remember the locations of water sources across a range of hundreds of square kilometers, returning to them with precision, even in years when the sources are dry and the surrounding landscape looks nothing like what it looked like on their previous visit. They remember the faces and the voices of individual humans who helped them or harmed them years earlier, responding differently to each. The depth and the duration of what the elephant can hold in memory is by any reasonable measure extraordinary, and it is the foundation on which everything else the elephant does is built. If you are new here, subscribe before we go further, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and what time it is there. We want to know. Before getting to the specific cognitive capabilities, it is worth understanding how slowly elephant intelligence develops, because the pace of development is itself informative. An elephant calf is born with a brain that is about 35% of its adult size. Humans are born with brains that are about 25% of adult size. Both species are born with brains that have a great deal of growing left to do, and that growing happens in an environment of intensive social learning. The elephant calf spends its first years in close proximity to its mother and to the other females of the family group, observing, following, and gradually incorporating the behaviors of the adults around it into its own repertoire. It does not have to rediscover how to find water in a drought. It follows the matriarch to where the water is. It does not have to figure out through trial and error which plants are toxic. It watches what the adults eat and eats what they eat. The slow brain development is not a liability. It is a design feature of an animal that is going to live for 60 to 70 years, and that has the time to accumulate knowledge gradually from a rich social environment, rather than arriving with most of what it needs already encoded. The elephant brain is the largest of any land animal in absolute terms. It weighs about 5 kilograms in an adult, which is roughly 4 times the weight of a human brain. And unlike the comparison between human and monkey brains, where the human's advantage in absolute size is partially offset by the monkey's advantage in relative size to body weight, the elephant's brain is large in both absolute and relative terms compared to most other mammals. The cerebral cortex, the region associated with complex cognition in mammals, is highly folded in the elephant, a feature that increases the surface area available for neural processing. The temporal lobe, associated with memory, is particularly well developed. The elephant's brain looks to a neuroanatomist examining it like the brain of an animal whose primary cognitive investment is in long-term memory and in the rich emotional processing that is connected to memory in all large-brained social mammals. The matriarch's knowledge is not the only valuable knowledge in an elephant group, but it is the most irreplaceable. A study conducted during a severe drought in Kenya found that family groups led by older matriarchs made better decisions about which direction to move in search of water than groups led by younger females. The older matriarchs had experienced previous droughts and had survived them. Their behavior during the current drought reflected that experience in ways that were directly observable. They moved with more decisiveness, chose routes that led to water more often, and kept their groups together more effectively than younger leaders did. The groups with older matriarchs had higher survival rates during the drought. The knowledge that made the difference was not available in any other form. It existed only in the mind of the animal who had lived through the previous drought and had retained the relevant information across the intervening years. That is what deep long-term memory produces in a social animal with a long lifespan. It produces survival. Elephant society is organized around the matriarch, the oldest and most experienced female in a family group, and the matriarch's memory is the group's most important collective resource. She knows where the water is. She knows which other elephant groups are safe to approach and which are not. She knows, based on decades of experience, what the landscape does in a drought year, which directions to move in, which dry riverbeds have water below the surface that can be reached by digging. When the matriarch dies, the group loses access to that accumulated knowledge immediately and completely. Studies of family groups that have lost their matriarch show measurable declines in survival outcomes compared to groups with an intact matriarch, particularly during periods of environmental stress. The matriarch's memory is not just valuable, it is life-saving in the literal sense. The documentation of elephant behavior at the deaths of group members is one of the most striking bodies of evidence for the emotional depth of elephant cognition. Elephants respond to the death of a family member in ways that look, from the outside, like grief. They stand near the body for extended periods, sometimes for days. They return to the location where a family member died long after the body is gone and stand there in what observers describe as a kind of stillness that is different from their behavior in other locations. They pick up bones and tusks of dead individuals and carry them, sometimes over significant distances. These behaviors have been observed by many different researchers across many different sites and over many decades. They are not isolated incidents. They are a pattern, and the pattern points to an animal that is doing something emotionally complex in response to the loss of a companion. Cynthia Moss, who spent decades studying elephants at Amboseli in Kenya and documented much of what we now know about elephant social life and elephant grief, described watching a family group encounter the bones of their matriarch months after her death. The family approached the remains, touched the bones with their trunks, picked up and held the skull and stood in silence around the remains for an extended period. One young female, the matriarch's daughter, returned to the remains repeatedly over the following days. Moss did not interpret this anthropomorphically as proof that elephants grieved the way humans do, but she also did not pretend it was nothing. What she recorded was an animal spending time with the physical remains of a specific individual in a way that was different from its behavior in any other context, and that could not be explained by any simple stimulus-response mechanism. The behavior reflected a relationship between the living animal and the dead individual that persisted in the living animal's mind long after the individual was gone. That persistence is memory, in the most practical and meaningful sense of the word. The elephant's response to the remains of other elephants is particularly striking because it extends beyond the animal's own family group. Elephants have been observed investigating and spending time with the bones of individuals they are not related to and may never have encountered in life. The sight of elephant bones produces a response in other elephants that the sight of the bones of other large animals does not produce. There is something specific about the recognition of elephant remains that triggers a behavioral response, and that specificity suggests something about the elephant's cognitive representation of other elephants as a category with particular significance, not just as other large objects in the environment. Elephant empathy is documented in field observations across multiple research sites. Elephants respond to distress in group members by approaching, making contact, and producing specific low-frequency vocalizations that seem to function as reassurance. They assist injured or immobilized group members, sometimes spending hours attempting to help an animal that cannot get up. There are documented cases of elephants attempting to assist injured humans. The empathic response in elephants is not limited to individuals they know well. It has been observed between individuals who have had limited prior contact. which suggests that the empathy is not simply a byproduct of strong bond formation, but something more general, a response to the signs of distress in another individual that operates independently of the specific relationship. The number of neurons in the elephant's brain is also remarkable and bears on the comparison directly. Recent research has found that the elephant's cerebellum, the brain region associated with motor coordination and increasingly with cognitive functions as well, contains more neurons than any other mammal studied to date, including humans. The total neuron count in the elephant's brain is estimated at around 257 billion compared to around 86 billion in the human brain. The vast majority of these are in the cerebellum rather than the cortex, which is why the comparison does not simply map onto the question of who is smarter, because cortical neurons and cerebellar neurons do different things. But the sheer number tells you something about the scale of the neural processing the elephant's brain is capable of, and about why dismissing the elephant as less cognitively complex than a monkey on the basis of simple behavioral comparisons is a mistake that the neural data does not support. The mirror test for self-recognition, which we discussed in the context of monkeys in the previous part, has also been administered to elephants, and the results are positive. Elephants have passed the mirror test. They use mirrors to examine parts of themselves they cannot normally see, and they show awareness that the image in the mirror is their own image rather than another individual. The number of animal species that have passed the mirror test is small. The elephant is one of them. This places it in cognitive company with great apes, dolphins, and some corvids. The animals that have most consistently shown this specific form of self-awareness. The elephant's ability to recognize individual humans by their smell, their voice, and their appearance has been documented in ways that have practical implications for conservation and for the management of human-elephant conflict. Elephants in areas where they have been poached distinguish between humans from communities with a history of poaching versus communities without that history, responding with avoidance and alarm to members of the former and with relative calm to members of the latter. In one famous study in Kenya, elephants responded differently to the red clothing associated with Maasai herders who sometimes spear elephants, and to the different clothing of a nearby farming community with no such history. The elephants were not responding to clothing as a category. They were tracking the specific association between a visual cue and a threat history, and they were applying that association to their behavior in ways that reflected genuine threat assessment rather than generalized fear of humans. This individual recognition and threat tracking extends to elephants' relationships with each other. Elephants can identify more than 100 other individual elephants by the sound of their calls alone. They know who is calling. They know what the caller's relationship to their own group is, and they respond to that knowledge appropriately, calling back to family members, alerting to the calls of rival or unknown groups, ignoring or relaxing in response to the calls of known friendly groups. The social recognition system of an elephant is operating across a network of relationships that extends well beyond the immediate family group into the broader community of elephants whose ranges overlap with theirs. Managing that extended social network, with all its history and all its relationships, requires exactly the kind of deep, long-term memory that the elephant's brain is built for. The communication system of elephants is one of the most complex in the animal kingdom, and a significant portion of it operates below the range of human hearing. Elephants produce infrasound calls, low-frequency rumbles that can travel for several kilometers through the ground and through the air, and that carry information that other elephants decode and respond to with specificity. A family group that hears a recording of a deceased matriarch's contact call will respond to it, clustering together and searching for the source of the sound. A family group that hears the contact call of a living matriarch from a different family group responds differently than it does to the call of its own matriarch. The elephant is not just hearing sounds, it is reading the identity, the location, and the emotional state of the caller from the specific acoustic properties of the call, and responding to that information appropriately. This is a sophisticated acoustic communication system that we have only partially decoded. The elephant's use of tools is less extensive than the monkey's, but it is real. They use branches to swat flies, modifying them if necessary to make them more effective. They use objects to scratch parts of their body they cannot reach directly. There are documented cases of elephants using logs to prop open electric fences, and of elephants throwing objects at electric fences to test them before crossing. These behaviors require planning in the sense of using an available object to achieve a goal that cannot be achieved directly, which is the cognitive requirement that defines tool use in the technical sense. The elephant is not a habitual tool user the way the capuchin is, but the capacity is there, and it surfaces in specific situations in ways that reflect genuine problem-solving rather than accidental behavior. The social life of an elephant herd is rich and complex in ways that make the term social life feel inadequate. The bonds between mothers and daughters last for decades. The relationships between females in a family group accumulate history across years of shared experience. The bulls who leave the family group at adolescence maintain awareness of their matrilineal family from a distance, responding to the calls of their female relatives and occasionally rejoining them in contexts that suggest recognition across long separations. The social network of a wild elephant population, when researchers map it from the contact data, is a web of relationships that has the properties of a genuinely complex social system with different bond strengths, different categories of relationships, and different patterns of interaction that reflect the specific histories of the individuals involved. The cooperative behavior of elephants adds yet another dimension to the cognitive picture. A study that presented pairs of elephants with a task requiring simultaneous pulling on two ends of a rope to access a food reward found that elephants understood the cooperative requirement, waited for a partner before pulling, and coordinated their actions to achieve the shared goal. This kind of cooperative problem-solving requires each individual to model the role of the other, to understand that its own action alone is insufficient, and to wait for the condition that makes the combined action possible. Some monkeys have been tested on cooperative tasks too, with more mixed results depending on the species and the task design. The elephant's performance on cooperative tasks reflects an understanding of joint action that is consistent with the deep social intelligence that its long-term memory-based social life requires. The elephant's relationship with humans across history is itself a data point about cognitive flexibility that deserves mention. Elephants have been trained by humans for thousands of years to work in forestry, in warfare, in ceremony, in transport. They learn complex sequences of commands and execute them reliably. They can be taught to perform tasks that are not in any natural behavioral repertoire through reinforcement learning applied to a brain that is capable of the kind of long-term retention that makes the training stick. The working elephant that executes a complex sequence of behaviors on command is demonstrating learning, memory, and behavioral flexibility in an applied context. It is also demonstrating something about the elephant's capacity to form working relationships with members of another species and to navigate the cognitive demands of those relationships over years. This is not the same as the monkey's rapid updating. It is something different. The patient, accurate accumulation of learned associations that hold reliably across time. The elephant's capacity for what researchers carefully describe as prosocial behavior, helping others at some cost to themselves, is documented in field observations that are hard to dismiss. Elephants have been observed supporting injured or incapacitated group members, keeping them upright, guiding them to water, waiting for them when the group's movement is faster than the injured animal can manage. These behaviors occur between animals with strong bonds and sometimes between animals with weaker bonds, which suggests that the prosocial impulse is not simply a byproduct of attachment to specific individuals, but something more general. The neurological substrate for this empathic behavior appears to include specialized neurons called spindle neurons, which are associated with rapid social assessment and empathic response in humans and great apes, and which have also been found in elephant brains. The elephant's empathy, in other words, has a neural basis that is similar to the neural basis of human empathy, which is not a coincidence. It is an example of convergent evolution, of different lineages arriving at similar solutions to similar problems through different paths. The social bonds of elephant females endure not just across years, but across generations. A female elephant's daughters remain in her family group. Their daughters remain in the group. The bond between a female and her matriline is the organizing principle of elephant society, and that bond is maintained and continuously reinforced through the daily interactions, the shared movements, the cooperative care of calves, and the accumulated shared history that builds up across decades of living together. When researchers have been able to track individual family groups across long periods, the stability of these groups is striking. The same animals, making the same seasonal movements, raising the next generation in the same family context, doing what their grandmothers did and what their granddaughters will do. That continuity is not habit or instinct. It is knowledge, held in individual minds and renewed in each generation, through the social learning that is the elephant's primary mode of cultural transmission. The emotional depth of the elephant's cognitive life is one of the most significant areas where the comparison with the monkey produces a clear difference in kind, rather than just degree. What elephants do in the presence of death, the standing near the body, the touching of bones, the long silences, has been documented at too many sites by too many independent researchers over too many decades to be dismissed as projection or anthropomorphism. Something is happening in these moments that the behavioral record requires us to take seriously, even if we are careful about the language we use to describe it. What the behavioral record shows is an animal whose relationship to the loss of a companion does not end when the companion stops being present. The elephant carries something forward from that relationship into the time after. That carrying forward is memory, in the deepest sense of the word, not the retrieval of a fact, but the persistence of something that matters. The young elephant learns by following. For the first several years of life, the calf moves through the landscape literally in the footsteps of its mother and the other females of the family group. The learning that happens during this period is not formal instruction. It is immersion in a world managed by animals whose accumulated experience exceeds the calf's by decades. Where to find water when the usual sources are dry, which plants to avoid and which to seek out, how to behave when another family group is encountered at a waterhole, how to read the signals of the matriarch's posture and the direction of her gaze. All of this knowledge enters the calf's brain not through any single dramatic learning event, but through the slow accumulation of thousands of small observations across years of proximity. The elephant brain that results from this process is not the same as the brain it would be if the calf had been raised in isolation or in a simplified environment. The richness of what it becomes is a function of the richness of what it was immersed in. Deep intelligence requires a deep world to develop in. The elephant has one. The elephant's capacity to recognize individual humans across long periods and to maintain a differentiated response to each is one of the most practically significant demonstrations of its cognitive depth. Field researchers working in areas with histories of human-elephant conflict have documented that elephants respond differently to humans from communities that have historically poached them versus communities that have not, even when the visual distinction between these groups is subtle. The discrimination is based on learned associations that are maintained over years. An elephant that was approached aggressively by a person in a specific type of clothing when it was young will respond to that type of clothing with alarm for the rest of its life. This is not generalized fear of humans. It is specific, precise, long-retained memory for individual cues and their associated outcomes applied to ongoing decisions about where to go and what to avoid. That level of specificity and retention over that time span represents a form of episodic-like memory, the recall of specific events and their contexts. That is one of the most complex forms of memory known in any animal species. The adult male elephant, who leaves the family group at adolescence and lives a mostly solitary life punctuated by periods of musth, the hormonal state of heightened aggression and sexual activity, has a cognitive life that is less studied than the females, but that reflects the same underlying architecture in different circumstances. A bull in musth is tracking potential mates across a large area, using the infrasound calls of estrus females to locate them at distances of several kilometers, competing with other bulls for access, and managing the physical consequences of its own hormonal state while continuing to navigate a landscape it has known for decades. The fact that musk bulls can hold all of this together simultaneously, the long-distance tracking, the competitive assessment of other males, the spatial navigation, the management of their own internal state, reflects a cognitive system that is running at high capacity, even in the absence of the matrilineal social structure that organizes female elephant life. The bull's intelligence is expressed differently from the matriarch's. It is not less. The long-term field studies that have produced most of what we know about elephant cognition share a feature with the long-term field studies on chimpanzees and on wolves, and on the other large-brained social animals that have been most thoroughly investigated. The important findings only became visible after years of continuous observation. A researcher spending a month at Amboseli would not see a matriarch lead her group to a water source she had used during a drought 20 years earlier. A researcher spending a year might not see the full range of social recognition abilities that the elephant's memory produces. The most important things about elephant intelligence are things that happen slowly over long periods, in ways that require the observer to be present and attentive for long enough to see them. This is not coincidental. It is the nature of the elephant's cognitive strategy. It is a strategy built for the long run, and it reveals itself in the long run. The monkey's intelligence shows up quickly in a controlled laboratory setting. The elephant's intelligence shows up slowly in a landscape it has inhabited for decades. Both are real. Both are remarkable. The difference in the timescale at which they become visible is itself one of the clearest expressions of the difference between the two cognitive strategies. The elephant's use of infrasound is worth dwelling on because it adds a dimension to their communication that has no real parallel in monkey communication. Infrasound calls travel through both the air and the ground simultaneously. Other elephants can receive them through their feet as well as through their ears, feeling the vibration of a call from a distant family member or a rival group before they hear it. Researchers who have studied this have described elephants standing still with their feet spread slightly wider than their normal stance, apparently maximizing their ground contact to better receive the seismic component of an incoming call. They are listening with their whole body. The information they are receiving this way includes the identity of the caller, their emotional state, and whether they are moving or stationary. Processing all of this incoming information and producing appropriate responses to it requires a sophisticated sensory integration system that is built into the elephant's brain at a level of refinement that decades of research are still in the process of mapping. What we already know is enough to make clear that the elephant's communication system is operating on a scale and with a complexity that the monkey's, for all its sophistication, does not reach. The elephant's response to music is another window into the complexity of its perceptual and emotional processing. Certain types of music produce clear behavioral responses in elephants, calming, arousing, orienting responses that vary systematically with the acoustic properties of what they are hearing. The Thai Elephant Orchestra, in which elephants play large percussion and wind instruments, has produced recordings of elephants improvising together in ways that suggest genuine responsiveness to the sounds other elephants in the group are producing. Whether this constitutes musicality in any meaningful sense is debated. What is not debated is that the elephant is processing complex auditory information in ways that go beyond simple detection of danger or food signals, that something in the auditory processing system is engaged by structured sound in a way that produces behavioral responses that look, from the outside, like emotional response to aesthetic experience. The monkey has no equivalent behavior on record. The elephant's relationship with its own death is one of the most studied and least resolved questions in the field. Elephants appear to have some awareness of their own mortality, in a way that is not easily explained by simpler mechanisms. Older elephants, particularly females, sometimes move away from the family group in the period before their death, separating themselves in a way that reduces the disruption their death will cause to the others. Whether this is an intentional act based on any understanding of what is coming, or a behavioral consequence of the physical decline that precedes death without any cognitive representation of mortality, is a question that the field cannot yet answer definitively. What is clear is that the elephant's behavior in these moments is different from its behavior in other moments of distress or weakness. and that the difference is consistent enough across observed cases to constitute a pattern. The elephant at the end of its life is doing something that is not simply a slowing down of what it was doing before. It is doing something different. What that difference means is still being worked out. What the elephant represents in this comparison is a different answer to the question of what a large brain is for. The monkey's answer is speed and flexibility and social tracking in a rapidly changing environment. The elephant's answer is depth, accuracy, and emotional richness in a stable landscape, where what matters most is what you remember and who you trust. Both answers are genuinely intelligent. Both have produced animals that are remarkable. And both have their limits. The elephant's limits are the ones the previous two parts were about. The monkey's limits are the ones the next part will address honestly, because the comparison is not complete without them. The elephant that a researcher meets in the field for the first time, whether habituated to human presence or not, is an animal carrying the weight of its entire life in its behavior. The way it moves through the landscape reflects decades of specific experience with that landscape. The way it responds to other elephants reflects a social history that began at birth and has been accumulating ever since. The way it responds to humans reflects whatever that specific elephant has learned about humans in the specific places it has lived. Every behavioral decision it makes is informed by a memory that is longer, more detailed, and more emotionally rich than the memory of almost any other animal it shares its habitat with. That memory is not just storage. It is the operating system that runs the elephant's life. It is what the elephant is. And when we say the elephant remembers, we are not just noting a cognitive capability. We are describing the fundamental character of a mind that has chosen over millions of years of evolution to invest its resources in remembering rather than in forgetting and moving on. That choice has produced one of the most remarkable minds on Earth. In the final part, we bring the two animals back together and try to say honestly what the four parts of evidence add up to. The question of which animal is smarter has been asked by humans about animals for as long as humans have been paying attention to animals. And the history of the answers reveals more about the humans asking than about the animals being asked about. For most of that history, the answer was assumed to be whichever animal was closest to humans in appearance, which is why great apes dominated the conversation for so long, and why animals like the elephant and the monkey, which are not anatomically similar to us in the way that chimpanzees are, were underestimated for decades. The more recent history of animal cognition research has been a progressive correction of that assumption, a systematic demonstration that intelligence is not a straight line with humans at the top and everything else arranged below by degree of similarity to us. It is a space with many dimensions, and the animals in it are distributed across those dimensions in ways that reflect their evolutionary histories rather than their distance from a human template. The monkey and the elephant are both far from the human template in different ways. Both have turned out to be far more cognitively sophisticated than the template-based assumption predicted. That is one of the more satisfying stories in the science of the last 50 years. We started with a question that sounded simple. Are monkeys actually smarter than elephants? After 4 parts looking closely at both animals, the honest answer is that the question contains a false assumption, which is that intelligence is one thing that one animal can have more of than another in the way that one animal can be heavier or taller. Intelligence is not one thing. It is a collection of capacities, and the monkey and the elephant have those capacities in different proportions, built for different purposes, producing different outcomes when applied to different problems. Subscribe if you have not already, and drop a comment telling us where you are in the world and what time it is there. But within that honest complexity, there is still something real to say about where each animal has the advantage, and what the comparison actually shows when you look at the full picture. The monkey is faster. It learns more quickly, updates more reliably, transfers knowledge across contexts more efficiently, and adapts to new environments at a speed that the elephant cannot match. The elephant is deeper. It remembers longer, recognizes more individuals, maintains social bonds across greater spans of time, and brings an emotional richness to its relationships that goes beyond what the monkey's faster but shallower processing produces. Neither of these is simply better. But in the specific categories where the title of this series draws the battle lines, in the category of being smart, in the way that produces the most visible cognitive performance across the widest range of tests. The monkey comes out ahead. The most instructive head-to-head research comes from studies that presented both monkeys and elephants with the same class of problem under controlled conditions. One category that has produced particularly clear results is the transitive inference task, where an animal is trained on a series of relationships. A is better than B is better than C is better than D, and then tested on a novel pairing it has never seen, such as B versus D. Getting this right requires inferring the relationship from the hierarchy rather than from direct experience. Both monkeys and elephants can solve this task. What differs is the speed at which they reach reliable performance and the robustness of the inferred hierarchy under novel conditions. Monkeys typically reach reliable performance faster. Elephants, once they have the hierarchy, apply it with greater consistency across a longer time window. The monkey gets there first, the elephant keeps it longer. Which of those is more valuable depends on whether the problem is one you need to solve quickly or one you need to solve reliably over a long period. The research on learning speed and cognitive flexibility consistently favors the monkey. The research on long-term memory and emotional depth consistently favors the elephant. When researchers have tried to run direct comparisons on the same tasks, the results depend heavily on which tasks were chosen. Tasks that require fast updating and rule transfer go to the monkey. Tasks that require precise long-term recall of specific events and locations go to the elephant. The comparison is not unfair to either animal when it is done this way. It is just honest about what each animal is built for and what that means in the specific cognitive arenas that the comparison puts in front of them. There is a deeper point that the comparison makes visible, which is about the relationship between the environment an animal lives in and the cognitive tools that environment produces. The monkey lives in a world of other minds, a rapidly changing social landscape where what matters most is who just did what to whom and what the right response is right now. That world produced a fast, flexible, socially calibrated mind. The elephant lives in a world of time, a stable landscape where what matters most is what happened before and where things are and who can be trusted across the long arc of a life that can span 7 decades. That world produced a deep, accurate, emotionally rich mind. Both minds are genuinely remarkable. They are remarkable in different ways for different reasons, and the comparison between them is most interesting not as a ranking but as a window into how radically different the answer to the question of what intelligence is for can be across two animals that share the same planet. The practical dimension of this comparison is also worth noting. In the world that exists right now, with its rapidly changing landscapes, its expanding human settlements, its disappearing wild spaces, the cognitive trait that is producing the better survival outcome is the monkeys. Monkey species in human-altered landscapes generally do well. Elephant species in human-altered landscapes struggle. Some of this is about size and resource requirements, but some of it is about what kind of intelligence the current world rewards. And the current world rewards updating fast over remembering deep. The monkey's intelligence was built for a world that keeps changing. It turns out to be quite well suited to the world we have made. The question of what each animal loses when it loses habitat is also a cognitive question. A monkey troop that loses its forest and ends up in a smaller, more fragmented patch of habitat loses the complexity that drives its intelligence. The social group gets smaller. The range of problems available to solve gets narrower. The social network that the monkey's brain evolved to track gets simpler. Over generations, if the simplification is severe enough, the cognitive demands decrease, and the selection pressure for the cognitive capacities that make monkeys so impressive weakens. Intelligence is not a fixed property. It is a trait that evolves in response to the demands of the environment, and an environment that no longer demands, it will gradually stop selecting for it. This is not a concern on the timescale of any individual monkey alive today. It is a concern on the timescale of the species, and it is one reason why the loss of complex natural environments is a cognitive loss, as well as a biodiversity loss. The elephant faces a version of the same problem. The matriarch's knowledge, which we established is one of the most valuable cognitive assets in elephant society, accumulates over decades of ranging through a landscape that is large enough and stable enough to teach the animal what it needs to know. A matriarch who has spent 60 years learning a landscape of 100 square kilometers has knowledge that a matriarch confined to a small reserve cannot accumulate, because the lessons are not there to be learned. The landscape that produces the knowledge has to be there first. When it is not, the knowledge is not produced. And the elephant that does not know where the water is in a drought year is an elephant whose intelligence cannot save it. This does not mean the elephant is failing. Elephant populations in protected areas with good conservation management are stable and in some cases growing. The elephant's intelligence is more than sufficient for the life the elephant lives when the conditions for that life are present. What it is not sufficient for is the rapid adaptation to radically changed conditions that the monkey's faster updating allows. The elephant needs the world to stay close enough to what its intelligence was built for. The monkey can find a way to live in a world that has changed into something its ancestors would not recognize. That difference matters, and it is fair to name it. The two animals have also shaped human understanding of intelligence in ways that deserve acknowledgement. The decades of cognitive research on macaques contributed directly to our understanding of how primate brains process information, form categories, and update beliefs. Findings that inform human neuroscience and human psychology, as well as comparative cognition. The decades of field research on elephants contributed to our understanding of how long-term social memory works, how emotional bonds form and persist, and what empathy looks like when it occurs in a brain that is organized differently from ours, but reaches some of the same outcomes. Both animals have been, in the most literal sense, teachers. Not intentionally, but the science done on and with them has expanded what we know about minds in ways that are not limited to the specific species studied. The research that most directly bears on the question of whether monkeys are smarter than elephants is the research that put both animals through the same cognitive tests under the same conditions. A landmark series of studies that ran both species through problem-solving batteries designed to be equally appropriate for each found a consistent pattern. On tests that required speed of initial acquisition, monkeys were faster. On tests that required retention across long delays, elephants were more accurate. On tests that required flexible transfer of a learned rule to a new set of stimuli, monkeys transferred faster. On tests that required recognizing a specific individual from a pool of many individuals encountered months earlier, elephants were more accurate. The pattern held across multiple research groups, multiple test formats, and multiple species on both sides of the comparison. It is not a coincidence. It is what the two cognitive architectures actually produce when you measure them directly. The monkey learns the rule faster and applies it more flexibly. The elephant holds the specific memory longer and retrieves it more accurately. Neither of these is a failure on the part of the animal that does less well on that particular dimension. Each is the natural output of a system built for something specific. One of the clearest ways to see the difference is to ask what each animal does when it encounters something it has never seen before. A monkey encountering a novel object investigates it immediately. It handles it, manipulates it, tries different things with it, files what it learns in a behavioral repertoire that it will draw on the next time something similar appears. The investigation is fast, active, and exploratory. An elephant encountering a novel object approaches more cautiously, takes longer to make contact, and spends more time in the initial assessment phase before committing to investigation. Once it decides the object is safe, its interaction with it is thorough and attentive. But the initial response is slower. This difference in approach to novelty is not random. It reflects the costs that each animal faces when it gets novelty assessment wrong. A monkey that approaches a novel object incorrectly risks a painful surprise, but is unlikely to be killed by it. An elephant that approaches a novel object incorrectly could be walking into something catastrophic. The slower, more careful approach to novelty in the elephant is the elephant being intelligent in the way that an animal its size, with its slow reproductive rate and its long lifespan, needs to be intelligent. The faster, more exploratory approach in the monkey is the monkey being intelligent in the way that an animal living in a complex, fast-changing social environment needs to be. Both responses are smart for the animal producing them. In the specific test of who investigates faster, the monkey wins. In the specific test of who assesses more carefully before committing, the elephant wins. The question of whether the monkey's advantage in speed of learning translates into a genuine advantage in survival outcomes is one that the population data addresses indirectly. Monkey species as a group are not declining at the rate that elephant species are, and part of the reason is the cognitive flexibility that allows monkey populations to find ways to persist in landscapes that have changed significantly from what their evolutionary history equipped them for. This is not a simple story. Many monkey species are declining badly, primarily due to habitat loss that even flexible cognition cannot fully compensate for. But the cognitive flexibility does provide a buffer that the elephant's more specialized intelligence does not. The monkey can eat different things in a degraded habitat. The monkey can learn to avoid new threats quickly. The monkey can find new travel routes through a changed landscape within the lifetime of a single individual. The elephant is doing the same things with older, deeper information that takes decades to accumulate. When the landscape changes faster than decades, the elephant's information becomes outdated. The monkey's does not, because the monkey generates new information continuously at a rate that keeps up with the change. The comparison also reveals something important about what we mean when we say an animal is smart. For most of human history, the intuitive answer to this question was something like, smart means able to do what humans do, or something close to it. The animals that passed this informal test were the great apes, the dolphins, occasionally the elephants and corvids. Monkeys were often seen as a step below, clever, but not quite at the level of genuine intelligence. What the research of the last several decades has done is to complicate this intuition systematically. The tests that were initially used to assess intelligence were designed around a human cognitive style, emphasizing deliberate problem-solving, abstract reasoning, and flexible tool use. On these tests, monkeys did well, but not as well as great apes. When researchers designed tests that were more ecologically appropriate for each species, matching the test demands to the actual cognitive demands of the animal's natural life, the picture changed. The monkey that struggled on a formal category learning task, borrowed from human experimental psychology, performed at an impressive level on a social inference task that required predicting the behavior of a dominant individual based on prior interaction history. The intelligence was there. The test had not been looking in the right place. When we look in the right place for both the monkey and the elephant, what we find is two animals that are each genuinely intelligent in the full sense of the word, and that are intelligent in different ways because they have been shaped by different worlds. The researchers who have spent careers studying one of these animals tend to develop a specific kind of affection for what they study, not a sentimental one, but the affection that comes from long familiarity with something you have come to understand in detail. The primatologist who has spent 20 years watching macaque troops navigates the literature on monkey cognition with a confidence that comes from knowing not just what the papers say, but what the animals are actually like, the specific quality of their attention, the speed with which a group updates when something changes, the social precision of the relationships you can watch playing out in real time, if you are patient and quiet enough. The elephant researcher has a different kind of knowledge, built over decades of following the same family groups through the same seasonal rhythms, knowing the matriarch's call and the calf's new scar, and the subtle shift in the group's behavior that signals a change in the social dynamics. Both kinds of knowledge are real. Both have produced findings that would not have been visible to a more detached observer. The animals themselves taught the researchers who study them most of what they know about them through the slow, patient business of being present and paying attention. The final thing the comparison produces, the thing that 4 parts of looking closely at 2 very different animals generates, is a more honest and more useful picture of what intelligence is than the one we started with. Intelligence is not a ladder. It is a landscape, with many different peaks reached by many different routes, and the animals on each peak are there because the specific demands of their evolutionary history drove them upward in that specific direction. The monkey is on the peak that fast social environments create. The elephant is on the peak that deep temporal environments create. Neither peak is higher than the other in any absolute sense, They are different, and the species on each peak has adapted to live there with a thoroughness and a completeness that the comparison at its best is designed to help us see. There is one more dimension to the comparison that the four parts have not addressed directly, and that is worth naming before the final close. The monkey and the elephant are not just cognitively different. They are relationally different in how they produce their intelligence. The monkey's intelligence is produced in relationship with other monkeys, through the dense, fast, continuously updated web of social interactions that defines troop life. Take a monkey out of that social context, and you have an animal that is still capable of remarkable things, but that is not running its full cognitive program, because the program was built to run in relationship. The elephant's intelligence is also produced in relationship, through the deep long-term bonds of the matrilineal family group and the slowly accumulated knowledge of a landscape shared with others. But the timescale of those relationships is different, measured in decades rather than hours, and the intelligence they produce is therefore different in its texture, slower to build and slower to degrade, holding its shape across longer periods of isolation than the monkey's does. Both animals are social intelligences. They are social in different ways at different speeds, and the intelligence that each produces is inseparable from the social life that produced it. That is the deepest thing the comparison reveals. It is not about brains in isolation, it is about minds in relationship. And both of these animals have built remarkable minds through the specific kinds of relationships their evolutionary history gave them. The monkey and the elephant have been living alongside each other in the wild for millions of years, in overlapping parts of Africa and Asia where both are native. In those shared landscapes, they occupy completely different niches, and their intelligence is expressed in completely different contexts. The monkey in the trees, tracking social relationships and food sources in a fast-moving social group. The elephant below, moving through the landscape on a scale of dozens of kilometers, drawing on a mental map built over decades, leading its family to water that it remembers from a drought 20 years ago. The two animals are not in competition. They are solving different problems in the same landscape, and the intelligence each has evolved is calibrated to its own problem. The comparison between them reveals more about what intelligence is and where it comes from than it reveals about which one has more of it. The answer this series has been building toward is this: the monkey is smarter in the specific categories that the title implies when you read it in the most natural way. Faster, more flexible, more adaptable, better at acquiring new rules and applying them broadly. In those categories, the evidence across four parts of research consistently points in the monkey's direction. But the elephant is not less intelligent. It is intelligent in a different way, a way that is in some respects more impressive precisely because it operates over a longer time scale, and with a depth of emotional and social complexity that the monkey's faster processing does not fully reproduce. The monkey's intelligence is a sprint. The elephant's intelligence is a marathon. The title asks which is smarter. The honest answer is that the monkey runs the sprint faster. The elephant runs the marathon deeper. If you are watching a sprint, the monkey wins. If you are watching a life, the comparison becomes less clear. And that lack of clarity is itself one of the most interesting things the comparison produces. Both animals are worth protecting, not just because they are remarkable cognitive systems, but because they are lives, specific and irreplaceable, living out the intelligence they were given in landscapes that are under pressure from the same forces that pressure everything else alive on Earth. The monkey's fast mind and the elephant's deep mind are both products of the same evolutionary process, shaped by different demands toward different outcomes, and both are expressions of something that took tens of millions of years to build and that cannot be rebuilt once it is gone. The forests and savannas that contain them are not just habitats in the conservationist sense. They are the environments that the intelligence of each animal was built for, the schools that produced the minds we have spent 4 parts of this series describing, and the places without which those minds, however remarkable, cannot fully function or fully be themselves. The specific domain where the monkey's advantage is most pronounced and most consistent is also the domain that is most visible in everyday observation. If you watch a monkey troop for a day, you will see the intelligence in action continuously. The social negotiations, the quick calculations about who to approach and when, the fast reading of another animal's body language, and the immediate adjustment of behavior in response. The intelligence is always on, always visible, always doing something that is easy to recognize as clever. If you watch an elephant herd for a day, the intelligence you see is different. The matriarch decides which direction to move and the group follows. The calves stay close to the adults. The animals eat for several hours and rest in the shade and move again. The intelligence that produced the decision about which direction to move, the intelligence that will allow the matriarch to lead her group to a specific water source 30 kilometers away based on a memory of visiting it 6 years ago, is not visible in the moment. It is in the decision, and the decision looks from the outside like just a decision. The elephant's intelligence is the kind that is most impressive when you know what is behind the decision. The monkey's intelligence is the kind that is impressive to watch in real time. Neither description is a criticism. Both are accurate, and both are worth spending 4 parts on. What remains before the night comes is a question that is bigger than either animal. Both of them are endangered to varying degrees. Both of them are losing the habitat that their intelligence evolved in, and that their intelligence requires to function at the level it was built for. A monkey in a degraded forest fragment is still a monkey, but it is not living in the world its intelligence was made for. An elephant in a reserve surrounded by farmland is still an elephant, but it is navigating a landscape that its long-term memory has not been given the decades to learn. The intelligence is still there in both cases. The world it was shaped by is shrinking. Whether enough of that world will remain for the intelligence to have the room it needs is a question that the animals themselves cannot answer. What the researchers who study animal cognition most want the public to understand, when they are asked what they would change about how people think about intelligence in other species, is usually some version of this. Stop thinking about it as a hierarchy with humans at the top. The hierarchy model is intuitive, and it is wrong. It leads to questions like which animal is smarter, which produce answers that are either oversimplified to the point of being misleading or so hedged with qualifications as to be practically useless. The better question is, what cognitive problems does this animal solve, and how does it solve them? When you ask that question about the monkey, you get an answer that is genuinely impressive. It solves social problems at high speed and with remarkable flexibility, and it does this across over 260 species in every kind of forest and urban environment on 3 continents. When you ask it about the elephant, you get an answer that is also genuinely impressive. It solves temporal and spatial problems with extraordinary accuracy and emotional depth over the full span of a life that can exceed 60 years. Both answers deserve respect. Both animals earned what they have. The comparison between them is most useful, not as a ranking but as a window into the diversity of what intelligence can be and where it can come from. That diversity is worth knowing about. It is also, given what is happening to the habitats these animals need, worth protecting. Outside tonight, in a fragment of forest somewhere in Africa or Asia, a monkey is settling into its nest. It built it this evening quickly, from the materials immediately available, and it fits perfectly. Somewhere below or somewhere else entirely, an elephant is moving through the night on a route it knows from memory, following a path its mother showed it, and that its mother's mother showed before that. The monkey will wake in the morning and read its world fast and find its way through it with the quick, flexible intelligence that tens of millions of years of social living produced. The elephant will wake and move and remember, drawing on the deep well of its accumulated experience, to navigate a world it has been building a map of since it was a calf pressed against its mother's side. Both of them will do this without knowing the other is there. Both of them will do it better than anything else alive can do the specific thing they are doing. And both of them, in their separate ways, in their separate intelligences, will do it in a world that needs them to keep doing it. Sleep well. The monkey sitting in its nest tonight built that nest in minutes from whatever was immediately available. Tomorrow it will build another one in a different tree from different materials with the same efficiency. The flexibility that makes nest building easy is the flexibility that makes everything else the monkey does work at the speed it works at. The elephant moving through the night on its remembered route is moving on a path that its ancestors used and that its descendants will use, a path that exists in the landscape as a worn track and in the elephant's mind as a specific memory connected to specific outcomes. The two animals are doing what intelligence does when it has been refined over millions of years for a specific purpose. They are being exactly what they evolved to be in a world that needs them to keep being it. The scientists who have spent careers watching both of these animals, whether in the field or in the laboratory, share something beyond their professional expertise. They share the experience of having had their intuitions about intelligence revised repeatedly and thoroughly by the animals they study. The researcher who went into the field expecting to confirm what the textbook said and came back with something more complicated and more interesting is not an unusual story in this field. It is the normal story. The animals keep showing you things that the theory did not predict. The monkey keeps being faster than expected. The elephant keeps remembering more than expected. The comparison between them, honestly pursued, produces not a ranking but a question. What else are we underestimating in these two animals and in the hundreds of others that have not been studied with the same depth or the same patience? The answer to that question is probably more interesting than the answer to the one we started with, and the best way to find it is to keep watching. Sleep well.